Yeah, welcome to another tutorial with Sewwithtia. Thank you so much for your love in my last video. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be taking you through how to create this stylish flare dress that has a twist keyhole detail and also a petal sleeve. I'm going to be listing the items and materials I'll be using in the description box. And for the fabric, I made use of this non-stretchy thick silk fabric. So the first thing we're going to do is to draft out our pattern. Your pattern paper should be long enough to accommodate the length you want for this gown. So this is going to be my start line, and from there I'm going to be imputing my armhole measurement, which is 8 inches, my shoulder to waist measurement, which is 15.5 inches, my shoulder to hip measurement, which is 24.5 inches, and also my shoulder to full length, which is about 39 inches, inclusive of my turning and hemming allowance. After doing all of that, I just went ahead to create horizontal lines, and I also went ahead to label, as you can see. So on my origin line, I'm going to be imputing my shoulder measurement, which is 15 inches divided by 2, that is 7.5 inches. I went on to indicate that on the origin line, and I repeated the same procedure on the chest line. I connected these 2 points together using a straight line, and I came back to the origin line to impute my neck width, which is 4 inches. You could decide to go higher than that. And I went to the straight line. I came down by 1 inch to create my shoulder slope. On my shoulder slope, I said is 0.5 inches for joining allowance, and I found the midpoint of this armhole. I came in by 0.5 inches to create my armhole curve, as you can see for my front pattern. On my chest line, I divided my bust measurement divided by 4. I added 1 inch for ease. Remember that this is a flare gown. If you want something more fair, you can add more ease to it. On my waistline, I also divided my waist measurement divided by 4. I also went ahead to add 1 inch extra for ease. I went ahead to do the same for my hip line. I divided my hip round measurement by 4 plus 1 inch for ease. And I connected this point together, as you can see. Now, if you don't want something fitted at all, you could use the same measurement you have for your hip on this point. So I imputed what I had on my hip line on the lower part of my pattern paper, which is the end of my dress, and I added extra 5 inches to this in order to be able to give me this A-line effect. Remember that what we are trying to create is a flare dress. So I connected the 2 points together, and this is what it's looking like. I went on that line, I went up by 2 inches, you could go higher, and I created this curve in order to make the gown look curvy at the side. I also went ahead to add my sewing allowance of 1.5 inches on this point, and I just went ahead to connect these points together. After doing that, remember I'm using the same pattern for the back. I went ahead to mark out my back armhole from the midpoint to the lower end. Then I came back to the neck point. My neck width is 4 inches, like I said earlier. For my back neck depth, I made use of 2 inches. You could go lower if you want. And for the front, I made use of 4 inches. Then I connected these together using a curve to create this round effect. After doing that, now I went ahead to cut out the back neckline and the back armhole in order for me to be able to use this pattern to cut out my back first before working on it for the front effect. So when you're folding your fabric for the back, you want to fold on bias, that is diagonally, not straight. This is very important to have that flare effect. And on the center back, I added the 0.5 inches. This is not really compulsory firm, but I'm just trying to follow what was on the design of this particular tutorial. After doing that, I went ahead to cut through my pattern, and on that 0.5 inch on the center back, I just went ahead to highlight this point because I'm going to be stitching these points down. This is optional, you really don't need to do this. And like I said, if you want your outfit to be more fuller, please, when adding your waist measurement, you can decide to add more ease. So after cutting the back pattern, I just went ahead to cut out the front neckline and the front armhole. So this is what my front pattern is looking like. In order to create that twist effect in front, we're going to be using the mid neck point. As you can see, that is the point I highlighted, and from that point I'm going to be creating slash lines. I'll be creating 3 slash lines from that point. So all the slash lines are meeting on that point. This is really important. And remember that this front pattern also had a keyhole detail. So I came down by 0.5 inch from the mid neck point. Then I'm going to, that is the point I will start my keyhole detail. You could go lower, but for my, I did 3 inches, which I divided into 2, and I went out by 0.5 in order to be able to create the shape of the arm of the keyhole detail that is on the dress. Now, so this is what it's looking like, and use your hand to blend out that keyhole detail properly. The next thing we're going to be doing at this point is to cut these slash lines. Cut these slash lines, but you're not going to be cutting through it completely at the end. And in case you cut completely at the end, just take your tape to put it back in place. So this is what it's giving me. I'm also going to go ahead to cut through the keyhole point. That keyhole detail, I'm going to be cutting out the excess I don't want, and this is what it's given me. So this is my center front. At this point, fam, you need an extra pattern paper to place underneath this part where you've cut. Now I mistakenly cut through my pattern at the upper part, so I just went ahead to tape it down with my paper tape. So after doing that, you want to determine the amount by which you are going to be spreading this particular design. So I'm going to be making use of 1.5 inches in my case, but if you want a more voluminous twist detail in front, then you can decide to spread by 2 inches or 2.5. But I feel 1.5 is enough just for the tutorial I'm doing. So after spreading by 1.5 for each of the lines, I just went ahead to tape the necessary points down so that I'm going to be able to cut easily, and there's not going to be any form of obstruction while cutting. So after doing this, in order to cut, what you want to do is to fold this part that we spread. You want to fold this part back into the original pattern. So you can see what I did there. Okay, I just folded it back, then I had to highlight that point with my marker, then I went out to trim out the excess. So after trimming out the excess, this is what the front is looking like. I also went ahead to fold my fabric again on bias, like diagonally, and I added 0.5 inch in front. Remember that we're going to be having 2 pieces for the front, and for the keyhole detail I'm going to be adding 0.5 inches following the shape of that keyhole, and for the upper part where I spread, I'll be adding 0.5 inches because remember we're going to be joining these 2 pieces together, so you don't want to have shortage on your original measurements. And on the armhole part, I added 0.5 inches because I'll be joining a sleeve to this. So after cutting, this is what we have finally. And I went ahead to notch the parts I spread so that I'll be able to pleat easily and know where to stop. So this is what the 2 piece for the front is giving me. You could see the keyhole effect, right? Now the next thing we want to do is to cut facing. We're going to be cutting facing for the neckline, bias rather, which we're going to be using as a form of bias for the neckline. And for the neckline, I made use of 1.25 inches in width. And for the keyhole, I made use of 1 inch in width. So I used this to create the bias, and I had to do this off camera. So this is what the neckline is looking like. I'll just go ahead now to pleat that point. You could pleat, you could use gathers, you could use gathers to gather it, you could pleat. So I just went ahead to pleat. I think it's way faster that way. And I pinned this down, making use of an office pin. So I went ahead to the other part and I also created the pleat. So the number of pleats on the right side, same thing as number of pleats on the left side. So I'm going to flip this to the wrong side. As you can see, I'll join this together. I'll go ahead to sew with my 0.5 inches and I join the lower part. So this is what it's giving me. You could see the keyhole effect, right? And this is what the front is looking like. Now you're also going to go ahead to cut another strip of fabric, which is going to be about 1 inch. You're just going to fold this just to create a bias that you're going to be using to secure that twist effect on the front. So this is what I mean. Then you go ahead to stitch on the back of the clothes. That is the wrong side of the clothes. After doing that, I just brought my back pattern. You can see I've joined the back in the middle. I went ahead to turn with bias and I went ahead to join it side by side and shoulder by shoulder. So after doing that, this is what I have for the gown. Without my sleeve, this is what the gown is looking like. It's already looking like what we have in the tutorial. Now for the sleeve, for the petal sleeve, you need your basic sleeve pattern. You need your basic sleeve pattern, and I'll be leaving a link in the description box on how you can do this in case you don't know how to do that. I went ahead to notch the mid part, and from that mid part, I'm going to be going out, following the shape of the sleeve at the cap. I'm going to go out by 3.5 inches. Now, this 3.5 inches is going to be the point where we are going to have the overlap. Now, this is the midpoint. I'm just going to go ahead to create the design I want. Remember, it's a petal sleeve, right? So after doing that, I used my free hand here. You could use your pattern master. I'm going to go ahead to cut out the parts we don't need again. Now this is the part we need, and we're going to be needing 2 pieces for this point. I just went ahead to label the direction so that when I'm cutting, I would not be confused. Now, in order to have that flare effect, after cutting out your petal sleeve, you want to create slash lines on this petal sleeve in order to have that flare effect. So as usual, you're going to cut on the lines, but you're not going to be cutting through the lines. So you are going to determine the number of inches you want to spread by. In this case, I just use 1.5 inches. You could use less than that. You could use more than that, depending on how wide you want your flare to be. Now, after doing that, before I went ahead to cut, I increased the length of my sleeve by 1.5 inches. What I had before was 8 inches, which was short. I increased this. This is inclusive of my hemming allowance. And I went ahead to just cut this out, as you can see. So I also went ahead to notch the center parts of this sleeve on the fabric. This is very important because this is where you are going to be overlapping the sleeve together. So this is what I mean. You could see that notched point. That is where the overlap is going to be. That's where you're going to be placing them on each other. I went ahead to pin this point down. And before you go ahead to sew your sleeve into the gown, you want to take time to hem the edges. When I mean hem the edges, hem the lower parts, then hem the upper parts. And in case you don't want to hem, you can go ahead to double this sleeve. That means double each part of the sleeve. So after folding, this is going to be the midpoint that you're going to be joining on your gown. So I'm going to be doing this off camera. I just went ahead to hem the lower part. Then I went ahead to join this particular sleeve. I went to cut the second piece for the other part. Then I went ahead to secure the extra. Then I fixed this on my gown. So this is what the gown is looking like. What do you think? I hope you're enjoying this tutorial. and I'm going to see you in my next video. Don't forget to subscribe and